This is the CJ4, and this video is going to help give you a better overview of the airplane, its systems, and avionics. In real life, I am a corporate pilot with over 7,000 hours. I don't fly this airplane, but I fly an airplane with the exact same avionics and FMS in it. But I also use the help of a friend who's also a pilot and also a mechanic on a CJ4. The CJ4 has a maximum ramp weight of 17,230 pounds. The aircraft is powered by two Williams FJ44-4A turbofan engines, each producing 3,621 pounds of thrust. The aircraft is also pressurized, and it has a ceiling of 45,000 feet and a range of just under 2,000 nautical miles. The CJ4's maximum speed is 451 knots true airspeed at 31,000 feet. It normally has a two-pilot crew, but single pilot authorization is approved in the United States. CJ4 is also approved for day and night VFR and IFR operations and flights into known icing conditions. And that's all good news for the 9 passengers that can ride in the back of the airplane, because they can go where they want, when they want, most of the time. The CJ4 is equipped with the Collins ProLine 21 avionics. And if you're wondering, this is the working title mod. The first item we'll cover is the display control panel. There's one on each side, and each panel controls its respective side, with the exception of one button. The first button we'll get to is the nav button. This changes the navigation source between VOR and FMS. One time you would use this is when you're doing a missed approach from an ILS, and you have to go back to pink needles to fly the route in the FMS. You can also at any time rotate the select knob, and you can change from VOR1 to VOR2 and then press nav and then use whatever you selected down here. Next is the PFD menu, or primary flight display menu. And this changes items on the pilot side PFD. The top section under format allows you to have 3 choices: compass rose, arc, or present position. Rotate the knob to the selection you want and then push that same knob to make the selection. Under the controls section, you can change your navigation source, but whatever you change it to here, it becomes the active navigation source. You don't need to press nav at the top to switch it. It changes immediately. So in this position, it's VOR2. The screen will go away and you'll see VOR2 is the active navigation source right there. The next selection under controls is range. Right now it's set on 10 miles. The total range is 10 miles. Whatever this distance says, the inner circle is half of that total distance. And a side note, there is a better and easier way to adjust the range. Nobody really comes in here to adjust it, or at least I hope they don't, because there's a really easy way to do it. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Bearing source will bring up a bearing pointer or a second bearing pointer if selected. The bearing pointer will point at the FMS waypoint, a VOR, or it will be an ADF needle, which will point to an NDB on the ground. And to see what that looks like, we have to tune a VOR. I'm tuning 116.3. Now when we look back up, you can see the blue needle pointing towards Brickyard VOR. It is possible to put 2 bearing pointers on the screen at once. We can tune in another VOR, put it in nav 2. And once the signal is received, you can now see 2 bearing pointers. The blue needle is VOR1. The white needle under bearing pointer 2 is VOR2. These needles will stay up until we go to the off position and select it, then they will go away. The next selection under controls is configuration. And this is where we go to change our altimeter from inches to hectopascals. With a selection like this one, there's nothing to actually select. You just highlight the item you want and then rotate the inner knob to get what you want, and it stays there. Next is to put your altimeter in meters. I changed it. I could not actually get this to change. I don't think it changes at all in Flight Sim 2020 in any airplane yet. Next is the presentation of the flight director. We have a choice between V-bar or cross pointer. With the V-bar, you fly into it. With the cross pointer, you turn the airplane left or right or pitch up or down until the needles are centered. And the last item under configuration is angle of attack display. You can leave it on so it's continuously on, or leave it in auto. In auto, it comes on when flaps reach 35 degrees. And the last item is refs. Here we can set takeoff V-speeds and landing V-speeds. And these are the only thing on this panel that will set on the pilot side PFD and the co-pilot's PFD. But if you set takeoff and landing speeds in the FMS, that will send them to both PFDs, and you don't even have to go into this menu at all. And also we can set minimums for an approach based on decision height, or we can set baro for an MDA or decision altitude. For example, setting minimums on a Category 1 ILS approach. And this is what will make the audible call out minimums when doing an approach. So if you set baro, it's going to look at your altimeter. If you set radar altimeter, it will look at your radar altimeter here. Next is the escape button. Think of this as a back button. If you're in a submenu, it'll go back to the main menu. If you're in a main menu, it'll take the menu box off the screen. Next, we have an ET or elapsed time button. For example, you're doing an instrument approach that does not have a missed approach point identified by distance, so you have to use time. This is the button you would press, and you can see the time down here. Press it once to bring the time up and start it. Press it a second time to stop the time. Next is the format button. This is simply an easy way to change between rows, arc, and the present position map. And we just saw each one of those. If we go back to the PFD menu, you can see them under format right there. They do the same thing. That's just one more way of switching the format. And like we said earlier, we can press the escape button to cancel that menu. Next is the terrain and weather button. The first press overlays terrain. The second press will overlay the aircraft's weather radar. And when weather radar is active, you get this little blue line moving from left to right. And that shows the approximate direction that your weather radar is pointed at, and it will sweep left to right. And in Flight Sim 2020, when you select radar or terrain, it shows up on both PFDs. To turn off terrain and weather, press the terrain weather button again, and the indications will both turn white. Next is the TCAS traffic overlay button. This will show other air traffic on the PFD. Fortunately, the radar menu, TAWS menu, and CCP menu do not work. However, the baro knob does work. Set the local altimeter with it. You can also press it to get 2992 for transition altitude. We also have the tilt and range knob. The outer knob is tilt, it does not work. The inner knob is range, it does work, and this is the easy way to adjust the range on the PFD and MFD. Next, we have the electrical panel. Right now the battery is on, the generators are on, so the generators are charging the battery. We can set the generator to off. When this happens, the generator is still producing power, it's just not letting that power go out to the rest of the aircraft. And you would use the reset position. If the generator is not producing any voltage, then you would select the reset position to try to reset the generator to get it to come back online. Chances are after it was taken offline by itself. Okay, it won't do it by itself. A little thing called a generator control unit will do it. We also have the standby flight display that's over here above the landing gear lever. You can see that turning off and on. And that's a backup if all the screens go out and we lose total electrical power. And standby flight displays normally have their own battery pack that will last approximately 3 hours, some more, some less. With avionics turned on, we have this. With the avionics turned off, we get this. There's also a dispatch position. The dispatch button will also power on the FMS. That allows the FMS to be set up with your route, departure, arrival, takeoff, landing performance, etc. And this enables you to set all that up without using all the avionics and running the battery down. And this position is used when you come into a cold, dark airplane and when you don't have a power cart. Moving down to the next section is the tilt panel. It's a panel and it's tilted. Very clever name. The first buttons we can actually manipulate are the fuel boost manual buttons. That turns on an electric boost pump in the left tank or the right tank. And if we need to turn them on manually, this is where we do it. You might turn them on for low fuel quantity. And when these pumps come on, we also get a CAS message. More on CAS messages later. Next is pilot fan. This increases or decreases the speed of the fan for the pilot. There's also one on the co-pilot side. Climate control, we have off, normal, or compressor on. Normal will adjust the temperature based on where the pilot sets it. And no matter what, the compressor will not turn on unless the compressor on selection is chosen. And this could also be used on the ground with a power cart plugged in to help cool the airplane. Next we have ignition. These buttons will allow us to turn the igniters on for the left or right engine manually. And they would be turned on when flying through heavy rain or turbulence. Next is the cabin pressure dump switch. It has a red guard for a reason. It's not advisable to press it unless it's an emergency. When you press the dump button, that opens a valve, lets all the air out of the airplane, and will blow all the smoke out of the airplane if there's smoke in the airplane as well. And if you couldn't tell by now, I'm only covering the switches that actually work in Flight Sim 2020. I wish they all did, but they don't. The CJ4 also has a fuel transfer switch. You can see right now the fuel is transferring from the right tank to the left tank. This is sped up, but it does transfer at approximately 1,000 pounds per hour. And this would most likely be used when you have a fuel imbalance. This comes on at 100 pounds difference between the left or right tank. Next is cockpit temperature. This sets the temperature in the cockpit. The cockpit temperature is obviously on this side. The cabin temperature is on the co-pilot's tilt panel. The source knob is for pressurization. The off position does not allow any incoming air to come in to pressurize the airplane. Selecting left will stop air coming in from the right engine. Selecting right will stop air coming in from the left engine. Normal will use both. And fresh air will just use ram air coming in from outside, but that will not pressurize the airplane either. Next we have ice protection. These top two buttons are wing and engine anti-ice. And the bottom two buttons are engine only anti-ice. Next we have pitot static heat. These heat the pitot tubes and the static ports electrically. And last of all, we have a wing light. And this is a light that just shines on the wing and helps us see ice at nighttime. This is what wing and engine anti-ice heats. This would be the right selection, and if you select the left button, obviously you're going to get the other side. And if you select just engine anti-ice, you get just the engine inlets. But if you're flying into icing conditions, turn them all on. Use anti-ice before entering icing conditions. Use de-icing once you have ice on the airplane. And the pitot static heat, that heats the static ports on the side of the airplane and also the pitot tubes down here under the nose. And the pitot static heat has a 2-minute time limitation for use on the ground. And when you select the wing light on the ice panel, this is what it looks like. Next we have the cursor control panel. This mostly controls items on the MFD or multifunction display. We have an upper and a lower portion. The upper menu controls this section here. It allows us to turn it off to choose FMS text, checklist, passenger briefing, or bring up the systems page. You just rotate the knob to select what you want, then press the knob. So here, passenger brief, and you can select each phase of flight, and then press the knob again, and it will play that briefing. You won't hear it on here. I have the sound turned down on the game on the editing software, but when you do it on your flight simulator, you'll hear it in the back of the airplane. And let me correct that, you'll hear it coming from the back of the airplane. Also in the upper menu, we have a systems page. This would allow you to bring the systems up and monitor systems in this position. There's a systems button that will put it in a different place. In the lower menu, you can change between arc, present position, and the plan page. It's pretty much the exact same way on the PFD. The only difference, you're using this menu down here, and it's only going to change what you select on the MFD. So one neat feature on this you may not know about, on the lower menu, if you select plan, and then you have a route entered into the FMS, which I just put one in here from the departure point to Terre Haute to Springfield, Illinois. You can go down to the FMS and select MFD Advance. And then once it's selected, you have previous and next waypoint. If you hit next waypoint, the MFD will move along from waypoint to waypoint, and you can check your route. You can check it in the FMS, but you can also check it this way, and it gives you a pictorial view of your route. So really what the lower menu is doing is allowing you to select what format you want on the MFD, and it will also let you select symbols to put on the MFD as well. So to do that, we rotate the knob down to Map Symbols, push it to select it. Then we have a choice between airspaces, airways, nav aids, airports, intersections. I personally leave all these off. It makes the map on the MFD a jumbled mess. If you're wondering exactly what a jumbled mess is, it's that right there. So another cool thing you can do with these, you can select what you want on the upper menu and select what you like on the lower menu. And once you've got the MFD set up the way that you like it, you can press memory 1, 2, or 3. You can press and hold it, and it will keep the screen in that position for that memory button. Another thing you can do is press upper menu, and under format, select off, and it will expand your engine instruments. It'll give you a little bit more detail and some gauges on oil pressure and oil temperature that you did not have before. So you might decide you like the screen. You hold down memory 3 or any of them. I just chose 3 in this one. And that saves it. Now I can select memory 1, memory 2, and when I push memory 3, it goes back to the expanded engine and map page. And so far when I've done this, it has saved it. When I close the flight simulator and come back in, my page I want is still there. And the escape button does the same thing on the other menu that we saw above at PFD. And if we want to bring up terrain or weather, when we press the terrain weather button, it will only bring it up on the MFD with this button. The chart button doesn't work on Flight Sim 2020. It just brings up approach plates. The CAS page button, CAS is crew alerting system. If you have CAS messages on the MFD more than the amount that will display, you can cycle through to the next page and see all the CAS messages. The engine button brings up the engine gauges. In real life, you press that button, you get the expanded engine gauges or the small engine gauges. This one, if you press it, they go away. And then the terrain, weather, and traffic display, they do the exact same thing as we saw on the previous menu above the PFD. Then we press the systems button. That brings up the systems for electrical, the battery, oxygen, hydraulic, and fuel information. And then we also have a next page right there which shows trim information. By pressing the checklist button in the upper menu, you can bring up a checklist for each phase of flight. Use the outer knob to select the checklist, push the select button to check each item or to select the appropriate checklist. And once you've got the appropriate checklist, you can just press the select button as I did and check off each item. And the last button is the passenger briefing button, which we already talked about a little bit, so we'll skip that and move on to interior and exterior lighting. So here on the center pedestal, you have the outer knob and an inner knob. One controls the brightness of the PFD, one controls the brightness of the MFD, as you can see there. And the center knob here controls the brightness of the backlighting on the panel. And the knob on the right adjusts the brightness on the MFD and PFD the same as it did on the pilot side. For exterior lighting, we have a beacon. Press the button, the red light flashes on the tail. Next is the navigation light. We have a green light on the right wingtip and a red light on the left wingtip. And you'll probably notice there's no white nav light on the tail. There should be, I'm guessing, but for some reason there's not. And here's our strobe lights. They flash on each wingtip. Next is the taxi lights. They shine from underneath the fuselage. And from the same location, we have the landing lights. When we press the landing light button like this, the taxi lights turn off. You can't run them both at the same time. It's one or the other. And you can see the landing lights are much brighter and also a much wider beam. And here's a comparison: landing lights and taxi lights. And from underneath the horizontal stabilizer, we have two lights shining down on the tail called logo lights. The seatbelt sign illuminates the seatbelt sign in the cabin of the airplane. But the safety light will turn on the emergency exit and main cabin entrance lights. And last of all, we have pulse lights. The pulse lights are just the landing lights, but they flash, and they're generally used below 10,000 feet. And we also have a bright dim button on the FMS, and it actually works. And next we have the speed brakes. The speed brakes can be used between 0 and 100%. For flight, you have these two speed brake panels on each wing. And this is what they look like when they're fully extended at 100%. Right there, you have a panel on the top and bottom of each wing. But we also have a ground spoilers extend position, and that opens up 3 more panels on each side to destroy lift and help the airplane stop faster. And to the right of the throttle, we have the flap lever. Flaps 15 can be extended up to 200 knots indicated airspeed. And as we look at the airplane from the outside, this is what flaps 15 looks like. Full flaps equates to 35 degrees of flap that can be deployed up to 160 knots indicated airspeed. Next, we have aileron trim. We can go full to the right, and it has one trim tab only on the right aileron, and that is full right aileron trim right there. And if we go full left aileron trim, we can see that it does the exact opposite, and that actually took forever. When I did that, that sped up like 10 times. So it's actually very, very slow. And next we have rudder trim. Goes to 16 degrees either side, and you can see the trim tab there on the tail. And last of all, we have elevator trim. And you can see that moves trim tabs on each side of the elevator up and down. And on the overhead panel, there's also 3 floodlights. You can move each rheostat clockwise to increase the brightness. And when they are rotated to their full bright position, they look like this in the daytime. You can tell that they're on. And here's the same lights in the nighttime. So earlier we talked about FADEC, or Full Authority Digital Engine Control. Simply put, FADEC is a babysitter for the engine. The FADEC computer gets weather information from around the airplane for temperature, pressure, and computes what the maximum power is under those conditions. To illustrate that, you can see the N1 fan speed changing, the ITTs changing based on the temperature moving. The FADEC makes takeoff, climb, and cruise much easier. The pilot just puts the throttle in each detent, and the engine will put out the maximum power for each phase of flight. The CJ4 also has 2 maximum indicated airspeeds, one below 8,000 and one above 8,000. Below 8,000 feet, it's 260 knots. Above 8,000 feet, which we're almost at, you'll see the airspeed tape flip up to 305 indicated knots. And that is a thing in almost every citation, I would say every citation I've ever flown. And I actually had this question asked to me by a mechanic why it did that. They were seeing if I knew it, and they said take a few days to think about it. So instead of doing that, I emailed an engineer at Cessna and found the answer. And the reason they gave me that the speed changes at 8,000 feet is because the FAA says birds don't fly above 8,000 feet. So above 8,000 feet, you can go faster. There shouldn't be any birds there. Below 8,000 feet, if you were to hit a bird at that higher indicated airspeed, it could shatter the windshield. And at approximately 28,000 feet, the airspeed switches over to where we use Mach indicated speed versus indicated airspeed. And for Mach, the maximum speed is Mach 0.77. And that's about it for the speeds. As far as operational speeds, everything is 200 knots. First notch of flap, gear retraction, gear extension, and operating with the gear down, 200 knots maximum indicated airspeed. And to go beyond 15 degrees of flap, you have to be at or below 160 knots. And right there, we're below 200 knots. We can cycle the gear down. We get 3 red, meaning the gear is unsafe. And the gear is safe and fully down when we have 3 green. Another very cool feature about the CJ4, it has electrically heated windshields and side windows. There's an alternator in each engine that powers the window heat. So if the engine's running, the window has heat. It won't fog up and it won't ice up. So these front 4 windows are heated and there are no controls accessible to the pilot to operate them. Earlier we talked about CAS messages, or Crew Alert System messages. You'll usually see 3 different colors of CAS messages. Red means you need to do something right now. Amber or yellow means you need to do something soon. Or a white message means you've done something and it's a normal message, it's a status message. The red master warning will cancel red items, and the amber or yellow master caution will cancel yellow CAS messages. And when I say cancel, that means they stop flashing. Red messages will always appear on top, followed by amber, followed by white messages. They're listed in order of importance. Quickly, I'm going to go over engine starting. But I did miss one thing that I just now realized. On the battery switch, we have the battery on position in the up position, and we also can move the battery switch down to EMER, or emergency. If you lose all electrical power and the battery switches in the on position and everything's running, the battery should last at least 10 minutes. But with that switch in EMER, or emergency, less stuff runs and the battery should last for approximately 30 minutes. When starting the engine, we press the start button down here on the bottom of the pedestal. We wait for 20% into. When we get 20% into, press the run button. At that point, the ignition will come on. You'll see the 3 green letters right there, IGN for ignition. That's the left ignition. Then you'll also see ITT start to rise. See that right there? See that yellow indicator on the ITT on the left side go up? That's another thing that FADEC does. It knows the difference between when the engines are off, start, take off, all that. It knows the differences, and it will know the limits. And during the engine start, the ITT is one of the most important gauges you can watch to make sure that the engine starts correctly. And in the middle you have the starter disengage button. This would be used if you want to stop the start immediately, or if the starter doesn't disengage after engine start. And to shut the engine off, the same button we pressed to start it, the run button, we would press that again, and that would shut the engine off. And for the final segment of the video, I'm going to show you some operational tips. For a climb speed, 230 knots indicated airspeed works really well. You can use 250, but 230 works, and you use 230 knots until you get to Mach 0.62. You'll also notice in the climb, as we held an indicated airspeed, our Mach speed increased. Once you reach Mach 0.62, push the center button on the speed knob to switch over to Mach. So flight level change will now hold Mach speed instead of indicated airspeed. And as we climbed, our fuel flow also dropped significantly. Once we level off, I'll let the airplane accelerate. Then I'm looking for a true airspeed. I'm going to use about 420 knots. Once that's achieved, I'll adjust the power to maintain 420 knots. And if you've ever wondered what this little pink line is on the airspeed, that's the airspeed trend indicator. That's approximately where your airspeed is going to be in about 10 seconds. And over on the MFD, we have RAT and SAT. Room air temperature is basically the temperature the airplane's skin feels. If you speed up, this will heat up. If you slow down, it will cool down. Static air temperature is the temperature of the ambient air around the airplane. So that's the actual air temperature. Then International Standard Atmosphere, or ISA, it's ISA plus 1. So it's 1 degree above standard temperature at this altitude. And as ISA increases, your climb performance will decrease. However, when cruising at a given indicated airspeed, if ISA increases, your true airspeed will increase. So at that same airspeed, if it was ISA minus 5, your true airspeed would be slower. And another helpful trick is knowing what power settings will give certain airspeeds. So if you're playing VATSIM, you descend down to 10,000 feet, you need to go to 250 knots. If ATC says slow to 200 knots, it's good to know exactly where to set the throttle to do that, and here's a way to do it. And the trick is to use fuel flow. So I've adjusted my power to maintain 250 knots. Then I looked over at fuel flow. So we can see fuel flow is 464, we'll just say 470 pounds per hour per side. So if we set the fuel flow to 470, that should give us 250 knots indicated airspeed for pretty much any altitude. And here's the same setup at 15,000 feet. Power is set at 465 pounds per hour, and the airspeed is slowly decreasing to 250 knots. And back down at 6,000 feet, this is why you don't use N1 to do this. At 6,000 feet, we had 54% N1 to get 250 knots. Right now we're doing 253, and we have 63% N1. Here we are at flight level 300. We've got 470 pounds per hour per side. And you can see even at 30,000 feet, that same fuel setting is giving us approximately 250 knots. And at this altitude, it's actually going to take a little bit more. It actually slowed down just a little bit, but it might take 480, 490 pounds per hour to get 250. But you get the point. Fuel flow will give you an indicated airspeed. You can also see up here we're at almost 75% N1 versus at 15,000 we're at 63% to get 250. And if you're assigned a speed of 200 knots, you can go to 300 pounds per hour, and that will give you 200 knots indicated airspeed. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. Hope you found it helpful. I do have plans for more videos using the CJ4 working title mod. I have a few ideas of videos I want to make. And also thank you to the Working Title Mod group who makes this. This is absolutely fantastic and one of the best additions to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And as far as functionality, this is as close as you can get to the real thing in this simulator right now. And if you want to know more on how to operate the FMS, I do have a video on loading the FMS up, and I also have a video on working the autopilot in the flight guidance panel. And I will link both of those in the description. And last of all, thank you to Ian, one of my subscribers, for making the Corporate Pilot Dad paint scheme for the CJ4. And if you enjoy this type of video, I also have a video like this that explains all the buttons and some of the systems on the TBM 930. I also did the exact same thing with the Cessna 152.